Barev!
Welcome back to Jazwa Talks, the podcast where we spill the coffee, not the tea. We're your hosts Son
and Luz,
and we have a special episode planned for you today. It's very experimental because we recorded this episode in English Park, so you might hear some Yerevan life in the background. We spoke with Lilit Khandakaryan, a PhD candidate based in Netherlands, and three of her students, Sophie, Marisa Sophia, and Inez from Basel University in Switzerland. They're part of a class called Decentralizing Decolonial Feminisms, Perspectives from Eastern European Arts and Activism. It's a long name, but don't worry, we will unpack the meaning during the episode.
We had a really engaging multicultural exchange about borders, visas, and belonging. We also got art and literature recommendations from Armenia and Georgia, so we'll have those linked in the description. Just one thing, before recording this episode, we weren't aware that Basel in Switzerland, where the students are based, was the host city of Eurovision this year, and that's where pro-Palestinian protests against Eurovision took place and were met with violent police force. Since our last episode had briefly mentioned Eurovision, we only thought it would be fair to give space to our guest who participated in this demonstration to describe what she experienced as an activist. We find it relevant because standing against Israel's ongoing mass starvation and genocide of Palestinians aligns with what we define as decolonial feminism. So you'll also find helpful links and resources to support Palestinians in our description. Now, here's the episode. But first, introductions.
I'm Lilit, I'm Armenian, and currently I live in the Netherlands. I always wanted to continue my education and be a scholar because that's what excites me most. I really wanted to do something about Armenia, but that's like the hardest thing as a scholar because you don't have much background research, you don't know where to start from, and because the academic scene is very small, you feel lots of responsibility, as if you are representative of the entire country, and everything you will say will somehow be wrong or meet lots of criticism. So I was trying to find my ways, and the hardest thing was exactly finding the theory or the language to talk about it, taking into account that in Armenian context, also academic context, there is this problem that we don't have language to talk about Armenian experiences. So I still decided to start my project, and currently I'm doing my PhD. I studied also in Switzerland. That was the beginning of my PhD. That's where I met Hodel. We really liked each other. We had lots of non-academic discussions behind the classroom doors. And she was very interested in doing some research and work on feminist studies. And she's very much interested in Soviet and post-Soviet context. And together we decided, okay, let's start something and put together a program. So our work of designing this class was mostly research, just trying to find right ways to go into artistic work, literary work, and also activism. And we started the class, and we were not sure if anyone will be interested in researching Armenia or Georgia. But yeah, lots of students showed up, and we had a very big class. And in Switzerland, students have this amazing opportunity to also go to the country that they are researching and meet actually people there. So we decided to also come to Armenia and Georgia and meet artists here and start to build connections with them and learn from them, and actually completely switch this, the fact that people from Europe come and teach us what to do, but do the opposite, come and learn from artists and scene here.
Hi, I'm Sophie, and I'm one of the students who took the class with Lilit. And I studied gender studies and sociology in my first semester in master in Basel. I knew I wanted to do this as a master program, and that's also why I was so interested in this course, which treats arts and activism in another region. I don't really know much about it. I talked to Lilit a lot about that. I don't really feel comfortable of coming to Armenia exactly of this context, like we're a Western academic university group that comes to another country and are like looking around, and I just didn't feel comfortable. But thanks to Lilit, and we talked a lot, that we are really gonna change like this classic academic approach of visiting a country, and we're really learning and really open of what we are gonna see and also the people we are gonna talk to. And it's not that strict and academic, and I really like that. I'm also active in Switzerland in a feminist collective for the 14th of June. The 14th of June is like in 1991 in Switzerland there was a big strike, Frauenstreiktag, and because in Switzerland we are not that developed with women's rights, it's really bad, even though it may seem good. It's not for us. It's really problematic, and we also had the right to vote came really, really late, I like 71. This year's actually the first year I helped organizing the collective. It's so nice to organize a day with so many great people.
Hello everybody, my name is Marisa Sophia. I am also a student in this class. I am a little bit older than the other students. This is my second education. I was a theater actress before. This course really spoke to me because I am studying gender and art history. So it really combines these two things. We are talking to artists and at the same time in this gender context. I really am interested in performance, I think also because of my background. So how do we act? How do we perform? How can we invite change through really embodying things? That is really interesting to me. In my private life, I am really interested in mythology and symbolism. Actually, I want to say magic, because magic is also actually, I think, transformation for me. And I am also protecting bats. I am in an association for bat protection. So there are a lot of species in our region, but many of them are endangered.
Hello, my name is Inez. I am originally Mexican and Dutch, but we moved to Switzerland when I was 5 years old. And I study Eastern European studies. So this course interested me a lot, first of all, because I love my professor, Anna Hodel. I don't know a lot about the Caucasus region, and decolonialism is something very interesting and important to me. It's also really training me to combat a lot of inner biases that you may have been taught throughout your life living in a Western country. And I think also throughout my journey and this trip, it's been really interesting to notice that within yourself and practice to change it. Also, besides that, I work at a music festival against discrimination and for diversity. And I'm also active in a pro-Palestinian political activity in Basel. We hosted Yerevan this year. There was, in pro-Palestinian circles, obviously this talk of it's sponsored by Moroccan Oil, which is an Israeli company, despite the name of being Moroccan. And Israel is participating. In the end, there was many protests and actions happening during Eurovision week, but it really culminated the last day of Eurovision, so the final. I mean, the whole protest was peaceful in the sense of there was many people showing up, big crowd, families, kids, old people, people with disabilities came. And we were met with police. But at first it felt more like, okay, they don't want us to interfere too much with all the tourists and Eurovision village, as they call it, and whatever, which in some way you can also understand. And then we took an alternative route. And then we were met with police violence and with rubber bullets and tear gas. And they basically cornered us into a street. And police with riot gear came from both sides. You'd say they heddled us in, so we couldn't get in or out. And we were in there in total for 7 hours. Without water, without food, without toilets. They were all, one by one, questioned, photographed, their bags were searched. And then in the media, obviously, it was well, no, women and children actually had the option to leave, which was not true. That was very traumatizing, but then also it was this moment of, well, this happened, but you don't want to give up on the struggle, obviously. I think that's with any violent protest. They want you to then be weakened and to not protest anymore because you're scared of the police, but actually it's even more important to then, if you have the privilege, to be able to put yourself at risk and to fight even more.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to comment that it's interesting that not all of you are particularly studying Eastern Europe, but you're still interested in this course and how it pertains to art and decolonization. So let's start there. Lilit, maybe you'll hound your students to define it, but I want to start with you. What exactly is decentralizing and decolonial feminism? Because I think we know maybe the buzzwords, but what does this actually mean in this regional context and in feminism?
I will start from the fact that until recently, especially in Armenian and Georgian context, the Soviet experience and also before that Russian imperial experience has not been seen or actually taught as colonial experience. And there are lots of discourses and discussions trying to kind of change it, and these conversations are just starting. What would happen if we look at this experience as colonial, because it was, or imperial, and what it would mean for these countries, how we can unlearn imperialism and how we can find new ways of decolonizing our minds and coming to defining ourselves but not being colonized. So even though these conversations are going in the field, most of the research is focused on Russia, because apparently Russian academic field is applying this to address inner colonization, talking that Russians have been colonized themselves from West. I don't know, the most discourse goes around that. Or if we talk about the colonial context, the focus goes also on European, Eastern European context, but Armenian or Georgian context or even Central Asian context, these conversations are just starting. So in that sense, even though the colonial studies is aimed to decentralize actually the discourses, but it turns into, in academia, it turns into this space that it becomes also very centralized to specific context. Our aim was, in that sense, also decentralize these discourses that are in post-Soviet context and show what it means to actually be colonized and decolonize your mind and your academia and your work. We also wanted to kind of shift our focus and learn not from Western academia, but from women, from people who came up with decolonial discourse, post-colonial studies, and shift our focus towards that. So for us was very important bringing knowledge from African people, from African American community of scholars, from Latin American context, and use them as center for our knowledge, not just applying, but using it as starting point to find ways and language to talk about post-Soviet Armenian and Georgian context. So it started from there, and over course we also thought, okay, this class is about decolonizing, so maybe we should also decolonize the classroom, find new ways of working with students, starting with talking about our positionalities, where we are coming from, why we are doing this, and actually practicing some honesty. And in that sense, for us, Bell Hook's work was very important and central to learn from her how we can be in the classroom all together and talk about these topics. And we also wanted to show that academic knowledge and theory is not the only valid knowledge, and actually practices and artistic work and activism are also other types of knowledges. So in that sense, we were also decentralizing the fact that academia is epistemological center, but we wanted to learn from people, from artists and activists who are actually doing something, and take the knowledge from there and build our theories, our work based on their approaches and knowledges.
This is something I've come across too when I first did some research and started thinking, yes, Soviet Union and before that Russian Empire, this is a colonial power. But I was met with a lot of pushback, actually, and in Armenia in particular, where they're like, you can't say it's colonial power, it's something entirely different. Do you have a response to this?
I think from what I've experienced, because I have been in this field of study now for a while, and I've come across many attempts to really deconstruct and decolonialize also this field of study, because that's also a recent development now. And they have been trying to say oftentimes that it is a colonial or imperial structure, but maybe that also there's a factor involved of maybe you cannot really apply the Western perception of imperialism completely to the Russian Empire, that there's also a lot of, it's also very intersectional, and there's a lot of Orientalism also within Russia and from the Western perspective to Russia, where then within this Orientalist gaze, it's very easy to forget or to somehow like twist the narrative that it's maybe not as imperial. And then also in a context of socialism or Soviet socialism, it's like, I think, also a bit hard for people that, even me, that are interested in Marxism, but to still like be open to criticize that it was absolutely also some sort of imperial or colonialist project in a way to like impose certain structures and Russian-centric superiority on the countries that they added to the Soviet Union. And I think that's like the recent discourse that's going on right now, is to decolonialize Russia to then say that it was also an imperial and colonial power.
Thank you for that. I was also thinking the discourses, exactly these conversations, go nowhere somehow when we start like just saying that there is just one form of imperialism. I think the problem starts from there when they say you can't apply the post-colonial or decolonial studies because they're starting to compare imperialisms with each other. Like, this is not the right imperialism. But I think applying decolonial or post-colonial studies in this context is just like starting point to kind of understand and navigate what type of imperialism it is, and actually start from there. And lots of like scholars, also Armenian scholars, are actually doing it, not simply taking the post-colonial theories and applying, but seeing are there some specific concepts and approaches that can be applicable, using it as starting point to start conversations and understand this form of imperialism and start from there. I think this discourse is that like this is not empire, and especially not going towards Russian Empire and not taking into account like this shift from Russian Empire to Soviet Union is really like not productive. And I also felt like most of the times in Armenian context, when we talk about contemporary Armenia, there is not much research done also what was before Soviet Union. Like, we don't really see this whole broad image, historical image, what led to Soviet Union, and that's also one of the problems. And I think the field really needs to do much more research of not having like general image of Soviet, post-Soviet countries, which is still a problem, but actually seeing the differences of all the countries that were within the Soviet Union. Also because there were also tensions, power dynamics and relationships within this country and towards Russia and with Russia. So I feel like lots of the time this general image of Soviet Union actually doesn't really do any good for the research, and that's why in post-Soviet context now there is more research focus on actually countries that have been part of Soviet Union and understanding their developments before, during and after the Soviet Union.
And I think that's also really what we did in this course. We weren't like discussing a lot about, is it imperialism, what kind of imperialism is it, can it be applicable to this context, but we really just studied people and women that created something, that were artists, activists, and we really started from the bottom, and that was like the decolonial approach. It was like what is really going on in the region and what is reflected in the work. And I'm sure it's a lot that I didn't see in the work and then they didn't understand, but like we try to make sense and understand. And now on this trip we are talking to these people and trying to engage what is going on here in Armenia, and then learning from that what it means to be colonized or decolonized and in what way it works here.
To continue a little bit with that, or I'm inspired to say that I am really working a lot with the term situated knowledge that was named by Donna Haraway, and it helps me a lot in writing, but it helps me also in meeting people. So I think it is really a great tool to go to places, talk to people and see how they live. And I was so touched by this movie Sweeping Yerevan that we saw. I was so touched by it because of the community that they built in this van. They're driving together to go sweeping, and this is really something that I feel we miss a lot in our country and maybe also in the West. I mean, I'm getting a little bit spiritual, but people get sick because they don't communicate, they're not together. It's really healing, and it makes you go through the worst situations if you're together. And it was so beautiful to see them laugh and share their food. And so this is so inspiring to me. Yeah.
That's really great to hear you say that, because actually for me, having grown up in the US and having immigrant parents, Armenian, Russian, I just grew up very lonely but seeking this community. And maybe some would argue that with globalization, maybe it's fading from Armenia or Georgia, etc. But I still feel it here, and I feel like it's been really healing to go back to my roots. I wanted to make a disclaimer. I know that there's a lot of discussion about this term post-Soviet, that it takes away from the independence of these countries, but just using it here as a easier term than saying Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, Central Asia.
Yeah, I agree with you. Also because I feel like most of the time in the field, it also marginalizes this context. And I feel like I still feel like the difference, the marginalized pace of these countries, and reapplying the post-Soviet lens, or putting people within post-Soviet lens, really does that. Because, for example, when I started my academic work, they would ask me, okay, how you connect Armenia to the world? And like what world can learn, or what you can learn from the world. And it was like very problematic for me, because I couldn't see Armenia within global context. And I think it comes from border control, from the situation that we are in, from visa, from everything, but also the fact that we got mediated knowledge from Russia, and we were like also very closed when it comes to getting knowledge or sharing knowledge. It comes from the fact that we don't really see these connections. We really feel marginalized, and most of the time the academic discourses are pushing it farther and farther, just like putting this name on the countries, and after being born there or studying it, you need to like figure out what it means, what it means that I'm post-Soviet. And I feel like there is also lots of irony from this context. You know that the only way that you can engage with like Western or other contexts, just saying that I'm doing post-Soviet research, because that's the world, that's the key that they see you in, and it's like the only place that can interest like broader global academia, which is like also very problematic. And I don't know, there is like this hardship, like should I use the term or not? So in my own research, I'm also like very much interested, not imposing the term, because I'm not sure if lots of people, especially generations who were born after, long time after that, see or identify themselves somehow post-Soviet. Because first of all, we didn't have like critical knowledge, academic knowledge in Armenia about the Soviet experience. We are kind of like pushing it away, or we learned about it in one specific discourse, and it actually makes us sick to talk about it constantly the same way. So the fact that we didn't even learn what was it to be Soviet makes it really hard to understand what it is to be post-Soviet or post-colonial, taking into account that Armenia is pretty much still dependent on Russia economically. So yeah, I agree with you, it's problematic, and I think we should start working towards that direction. And that's why, like in my own research, I try to find ways to work with artists in the way that I don't impose like that you're post-Soviet generation or post-Soviet artist, but like contemporary Armenian artist, because you have things to share and you're also not that marginalized.
I was also thinking about this whole national thinking, you know, belonging to a country, letting that country define you. I mean, so often it has not much to do with you know what is said about the country. I saw in some artworks that it is very important to say, I am Armenian. So I understand it is kind of a reclaiming of being Armenian in the way that you are. Can you say that?
When I was 6 to 11 years, I was in Russia, growing up there. And when I came back, I was like, this is what Armenia is. Like, I couldn't understand. For me, it was too like different, because I get used to this Russian system. I studied this like Russian literature, everything. And it's mostly Soviet. You learn with Soviet books. So there is not a lot of change. And there is like total erasure of that. There is no like, oh, you immigrant, oh, let's study your history or something. No, it's just like you're Soviet. It means we all the same. But when I came back and like I see what really like Armenia looks like, I was shocked because I had the whole Russian narrative in my mind and I had really big Armenophobia inside of me. Like I was pushing it. I was like, no, I'm not Armenian.
I also was just growing up feeling like I don't want to be associated with Armenian or whatever. Like I'm Russian, which I don't. Now I'm ashamed, but I think it's also a symptom of this all too.
I don't know, I grew up in Armenia, and for me, and I heard a lot like what it means to be Armenian, what is Armenia, study Armenia, history, Christian country, whatever, you know, all these like cliche things, a national narrative, most of the time nationalist, that you constantly hear, and it doesn't really fit anyhow to your experience. Like you don't really feel seen or understood in that. And for me, like my cultural belonging, whatever it was, for a really long time, it was just a gap. I was just feeling like this emptiness. I couldn't understand like how am I connected to this or where I can find myself within this. And I think in that sense, the erasure is like a really good word because, I don't know, I understood somehow myself, some things that I was thinking about or talking about with my friends. For me, it's mostly like, it's not even about specific country or context, but for me, somehow seeing my worries, my thoughts connected in other people's works, in literature, in art, in academia, in other ways. So in that sense, I find my belonging through thought, through thinking with someone similar way and having the same worries or the same values. So for me, like the belonging and cultural sense just comes from that.
I mean, also in my gender studies, it is always this wish to dissolve borders, you know, no countries, we are all the same, we are like, you know, so this is I think this is also maybe a Western European thought that we should be just hugging each other and not see the differences. And so this is why I ask that, because I realized then that of course we have different histories, and to connect we need people, or to be understood, we need people that maybe have the same history and understand. So there are these two poles. One is like no nationality. It's not important where you come from. You're like whole without your nation. And then you have history. So I find that a really interesting topic.
Yeah, it's actually really nice that you said about it. And I was thinking, I was having conversation with Anna. I don't know who she talked to, but they were mentioning that it was very new for them to like think about memory studies, archives, and in that sense, like reclaiming archives and erased history. So I don't know, it was completely new for at least some of the students to have this understanding of memory and old heritage and reconnecting with archives or questioning archives. So it's also very interesting in that sense that you say there is not this notion. And I think it's like very privileged thing to say that I don't, like exactly how you said, there are no borders, but show your visa. There are no races, but you don't belong here. It's very like problematic in that context, and I don't know, I think like we need to think about borders maybe much more, to question why they're there, what are the regulations around it, like to think about our positionality in that sense.
About visa, I got rejected twice at the Greece embassy, even though I had even the interview with the consul and he was totally okay with me. But after I got rejected and I applied again, and again it didn't work, but it's very humiliating process because you have to show basically everything, like your finances, like your, I don't know, where you work, and you have to pay this commission that it a lot, almost maybe 200 euros, but it's doesn't give you guarantee that you're gonna receive that visa.
Another embarrassing and really terrible part of the visa system. In certain countries, you need to have like your medical history shown, but also take sexual diseases tests. And it's super embarrassing. Also, we already talked about the traditional setting of Armenia, to go to the hospital and ask to take syphilis test because they look at you in a certain way and you need to like prove yourself and say like, this is for visa, I am super cool, I'm going to study somewhere else, like I don't have syphilis, please can I have this test? So also like this whole process just puts you in like the circle of humiliation as a person, especially as a woman, because you are targeted more, especially when it comes to conversations around sex and sexual diseases. So I don't know, you also start feeling bad, thinking like, oh, so I'm telling constantly that it's for my study, but what about other women who just want to take the test? So it also puts you like in this position when you disagree with yourself, when you're mad at yourself for voicing it like that. So yeah, it's like another part of the whole visa process that I feel like people don't voice much, like these small things that you need to go through, especially as a woman from this kind of environments.
I also feel like it connects to what you said, like growing up with this idea of no borders, no nations. And I mean, having this idea, you can just have this kind of thinking or wish if you have this strong passport, where actually for you, there are almost no borders because you can go everywhere. And so it's easy to imagine or to wish a world, yeah, we all in a way wish, I think, a world where we all could go anywhere we want, but to make this a political statement, no borders, when for so many people borders is the reality they are confronted with constantly.
How does that make you feel to hear this wish of no borders?
It's like being in prison, but being told that you can escape that prison. But every time you try, it's electroshock. That it's just, I remember how I was crying when I got my rejection. It just took so much time, so much paperwork. I understand, like, it's doable, yeah, but it's just to hold this process. I just want to see this country. Like, I promise I'm not gonna, I even show, this all paperwork that I'm gonna stay this much, I'm gonna stay in this place, blah, blah. But it still doesn't work. You know, even like I was thinking if I work in this NGO that doing like human rights stuff, it will help me, but it didn't do anything. And meanwhile, other people that like, I don't know how, with their connections and stuff, they get visa, for example, or the people that work in visa places, they feel this power that they can talk to you however they want, or like just exploit this power that they get. And that's also very humiliating again. Like, I heard many stories.
I was also thinking, we talk about borders, we talk about visa, but I think it's also like important to mention that borders have completely different sentiment when your country is in war. When your country is in war constantly and you grow up with this notion that someone is crossing your border, I think that brings like completely different understanding or sensibilities to border. I don't know how you felt, but for me the border was always like the idea of border, this dangerous space, but also something like, oh, I don't want them to cross my border. Somehow like also protection space for me, because every time it meant if someone crosses your border, you are in danger. So like in that sense, saying no border also can bring different type of sentiments when you are in war, and it has to be with territory. If you never saw danger in your country, you don't have like the same kind of really hard relationship with the space that you live, and it doesn't affect your own personal spaces or body the same way. And also imagining and understanding other countries that are in war now, or like thinking about Palestine that is in genocide now, it's really painful. So this kind of sentiment feel like really hypocritical, like when we actually look at what is happening now in the world, and you don't really have also this space to imagine something like no borders, no nations, because you are being targeted or killed for being from specific nation. So it adds like completely new layer.
We want to know the art that you've come across in your studies, whether it's literature, film, in this region that has inspired you, and we want the recommendations. So please.
For me, what I remember a lot is the text, and I read it several times, from Ania Satrian, Mangled Bodies. And it's about this child that feels like butterflies under her chest, and she's really excited about them and thinks like it's her secret. But then she's like forced to tell an older family member, and then they tell her, yeah, now you're becoming a woman, your chest is going to grow and it's not going to be flat anymore like your brothers. And this description of the butterflies and this like excitement, which is then cut and thrown down by these elderly women that tell her, now you're old and you're going to be different. And she feels like, since she told them about the butterflies, that she is also treated differently, and she doesn't like it at all. And it's like she runs away from home, and she runs away from this older family members telling her what these butterflies mean instead of her own interpretation of the butterflies. And it stuck with me a lot. Yeah.
I also really, really like that story. I think because there's a certain body horror aspect to puberty for women or for people that grow up with a female body. And also I really like photography collectives that we looked at, 4+ Collective and Fungus Collective. It's Georgian, and I really, really enjoyed looking at that stuff.
This text from Jana Kukaine, Intimacy and Darkness, it's very complex text. I had to read it several times. It's not easy, it's not a read-through, but it really impacted me. And I think, again, it has to do with situated knowledge, it has to do with transformation, with understanding, but actually she offers a different perspective on how to approach feminist thought. It feels like a very holistic approach because she is bringing in the body, what I talked before, what interests me, so how you act with your body, where your positionality, and I think it also has something mythical about it.
It was really weird to first understand which artists can be selected within this group. It was a weird process of selecting texts and artworks, but it was also like very creative process to seeing like what talks to you, or because it's like also very honest to say that like the canonical way or selection is something that also talks to you, and you choose artworks from your own position. And in my case, the artist or work that talked to me most is Shoshana Vakian. Like her work talks to me most, maybe because of ways of thinking, of navigating like the absences, the gaps, the open spaces. And in that sense, because I said that I feel like this emptiness, some kind of like gap within my identity that I don't know how to make sense about. And her work is actually looking at the gap as a productive, important space of reclaiming your space, your time, your history, your memory. And like in that sense, her work was so important for me. So because first time in my life I felt like, wow, someone can actually see me. Like I had so many thoughts in my head so many years, and this like text with lots of gaps, lots of pieces from here and there, from lots of thoughts, voices, it's something that makes me feel whole, because my identity or my sense of belonging is really like built up of all these noises, voices, ideas, thoughts that sometimes don't make any sense, but together somehow they work. So in that sense, like Shoshana Vakian's work was very liberating for me and helped me to understand myself better. So I really wanted to start like the class with her text, also because when I think about like what is history, what is Armenian history or feminist history, like we talk first of all of erasure and absence, and I think we should start from there, because there was history, there were women who were working, there are still women, but somehow over time through power structures, imperialism, colonialism, patriarchy, their voices are just being constantly actively erased. And I feel like our work now is not only understand ourselves, but reconnect with this work by bringing them back from erasure and forgetting. And in that sense, as an academic, I really connected with Shushan, and I absolutely admire her work. And for me, it inspires a lot also in my own work to kind of try to work with absences, things that are, it's not that they are not there, but they are erased. So you need to do double work to find them.
And I feel like also what you are doing with your podcast, you are like maybe also telling another story of being Armenian and like what Armenianness can also mean. And I feel like that's maybe the connection somehow.
Yeah, I literally wanted to say about being Armenian and queer. I've been told all my life that like you are Armenian woman, Armenian girl. Right now I identify as non-binary, but when I was growing up, my mom, everyone in the family was like, Armenian girls not do this, they can't sit like this, they can't drink like this. Everything was under surveillance. If you don't do that, it's shame, like they would say it's shame or something. And then you just lose yourself. You can't understand what's right, what's wrong. And then also being queer, even my relatives, they're like, it's not a place for you to be here. You should go from Armenia. And I'm like, but I like to be here. Like, I can feel myself a person here.
I'm really honored to have met you all and to have these conversations with you, and I'm really inspired, and I hope to seek out this artwork and literature that you're all talking about. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you for listening. Just one small correction requested by Sophie. She meant to say paper birds instead of butterflies when talking about Anya Satrian's work Mangled Bodies. Again, you will find all the links to her work and others mentioned in the description.
Thanks again for listening. We're so lucky to be supported by our partners at Philia, a feminist fund based in Germany. And if you have a recommendation for who we should interview next, even if it's yourself, please write us on Instagram or TikTok at Jazve Talks. That's Jazve, Jazve, with one Z. Until next time.